What's going on, guys? It's Electro, and I'm going to be giving you guys my top 3 picks for the best comps in 9.14. I want to make a video like this for every patch, going as in-depth to the comps as I can, so if you do enjoy this video and want more like it, remember to drop a like on the video and subscribe. I will have 4 main criteria for grading the comps, and those criteria will be cost of the units, early game strength, late game strength, and average time to assemble. I'll give my general opinion on every comp and try to explain their strengths and weaknesses to the best of my ability. Now without further ado, let's get into the rank 3 comp. Ranking in on number 3 on my list for patch 9.14 is the Wild Elementalist plus Shapeshifter comp. Wild Elementalist and Shapeshifter is an insanely strong comp right now. When you are able to assemble all the units of the comp, it is unparalleled in late game power. With the Elemental Synergy, you will be able to get an additional unit on the board, along with the 9 units you will already have once you fully form the comp. However, the weak points of this comp comes from how many units it requires to complete, as well as it having a relatively weak mid to late game transition. It is really easy to fall behind in relation to other comps, because you have 3 major synergies you need to complete before you are fully able to come online. When you do come online, however, the sheer number of units will be almost impossible to beat. Playing this comp really requires a strong knowledge of building a strong economy, since you are going to need lots of levels. You also need to ensure that you have a strong economy past level 5, so that you can fish for those high tier units such as Brand or Swain. This comp is a personal favorite of mine because of how fun it is to watch once it's fully been assembled, but can also be frustrating to watch yourself lose right before you had the chance to finish your comp. Overall, I would attempt to run this comp if you are able to get an early 2-star Nidalee or Warwick, which will prevent you from losing too much early on. Try your hand at this comp, as it will take a lot of practice to master, but once you do, I promise it'll be a favorite. For the cost of the units, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10, because it is probably the most expensive comp in the game to form, due to the sheer amount of units you need, as well as the general cost of them. For the early game, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, because the only early game strength is how easy it is to get the first wild buff. However, it takes a long time before you are able to get your next major buffs, resulting in a weak early game. For the late game, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10, since it has the strongest overall late game due to the multiple strong synergies that this comp has once completed. You will have 10 units on the board with your elemental spawn, resulting in a comp that is very overwhelming to face once it comes online. For the average time to assemble, I'm also going to give it a 10 out of 10. Since this comp is the most expensive to complete, it also takes the longest. Finishing the comp right before Dragon seems to be an average time, however don't be surprised if your comp still hasn't been fully completed until the rounds after Dragon. The ideal comp for the Wild Elementalist plus Shapeshifters would be early game, Warwick, Nidalee, Ahri, Lissandra. For mid to late game, you want to pick up Gnar, Brand, Kennen, Swain, and Cho'Gath. For the number 2 pick on the list, I choose Ninja Assassins. Ninja Assassin is the simplest of the 3 comps on this list to run. Generally speaking, you only have 2 synergies you need to focus on, which are obviously the Ninja and the Assassin buff. Before I go into the strengths of this comp, I would just explain how ninjas work for those of you who don't know. In order to get the Ninja buff, you need exactly 1 or 4 ninjas. What this means is that in order to build a comp around ninjas, you're going to have to sacrifice the buff until you're able to have all 4 of the ninjas. This is the overall biggest weakness of the comp, because running ninjas is pretty much an all or nothing thing. The good thing about this comp though, is that since 2 of the ninjas are also assassins, them being Zed and Akali, you're able to get the assassin buff pretty easily, which carries you through the ninja transition phase. The 3-unit buff from Assassins is extremely strong and is a big enough spike to carry you from the mid to late game once you acquire it. Due to the overall early game and late game strength of this comp, it is very easy to go on a massive win streak and just tear through opponents, especially if they haven't built a Phantom Dancer yet. The simplicity and ease to assemble this comp is what makes it shine, especially since there are very few weak points. For the cost of the units, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10, because the cost of the units is very cheap, and most of the units can be purchased in the early levels. The only unit in this comp that costs more than 3 gold is Akali, who is a 4 gold unit, which is a really good gold average for a comp. For the early game, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10, because once you're able to get the 3 unit assassin buff, your early to mid game is very dominant, and since you can potentially get 3 assassins before you even hit level 4, I would say this comp's early game is one of the strongest. For the late game, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. While I would consider this comp to have the weakest late game of the 3 comps on this list, this comp is definitely no slouch. Playing an assassin comp forces the enemy to change their troop positioning and build phantom dancers just so you don't completely obliterate them. That is something that will always be valuable in the late game. For the average time to assemble, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. This comp requires 8 units, but is relatively easy to form. Since unit cost is so low, you could have more gold to spend on EXP, which allows you to fully assemble your comp before almost any other. The ideal comp for Ninja Assassin would be early game, Kha'Zix, Zed, and Pyke. For mid to late game, pick up a Shen, Kennen, Akali, Rengar, and Evelynn. For my number 1 pick for patch 9.14, I picked Glacial Rangers. Glacial Ranger is my number 1 pick for this patch because it has everything you could want in a comp. It has a mostly strong early game with lots of options, as well as arguably the strongest late game right behind Wild Elementalists. For surviving the early game, you want to get a Vayne early and try to get a Garen and Fiora as well. This allows you to get the Noble buff, which is currently the strongest early game buff. As you start to level up and see more Ashes and Varus, you can add them into your comp and just keep building until you eventually replace the Garen and Fiora. This strategy allows for Glacial to scale up since the majority of the units are 3 to 5 cost units. However, once you're able to get the Glacial and Ranger buff together, you are almost unstoppable. You will have a 30% chance to stun on every auto attack, as well as the Ranger buff, which doubles attack speed. If any of you have played as or against this comp, you know how infuriating it can be, and it almost doesn't even seem fair. Your characters may be squishy, but they won't take any damage if the enemy can't move. The main weakness right now for this comp is that a lot of people are trying to run it, so you may have a difficult time acquiring high cost units. I would try and avoid running this comp if it seems like 2 or more people are trying to play it. This comp is very adaptable and is strong in almost every part of the game, and is the comp that I would most highly suggest to you. For the cost of the units, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. Because the cost of the units is pretty high given that 4 of the 8 units are 3 gold or higher, I would suggest focusing mostly on your economy and building up to get those high cost units. For the early game, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. The best early game synergy is Nobles, and since that is something you can run as a placeholder, you have to consider Glacial Rangers to also have a very strong early game. For the late game, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. It can be debated that this comp has the best late game since the insane CC counters so many comps. There is no doubt that if you're able to assemble this comp, you're going to have an incredibly high chance of winning. For the average time to assemble, I'm going to also give it a 9 out of 10 because this comp requires 8 units and a lot of those units are expensive. Due to this, it will take a significant amount of time to fully form your comp, so don't blow all your gold on rerolls. The ideal comp for Glacial Rangers is early game, Vayne, Garen, Fiora, and Mordekaiser. For mid to late game, Varus, Ashe, Volibear, Kindred, Sejuani, and either Anivia or Lissandra. Don't forget that Garen and Fiora are just placeholders for the early game. For those of you who stayed to the end, I want to say thank you so much for watching. I could never have expected this amount of support for making TFT videos, and it just makes me want to keep going. My past couple of videos are some of the most well received on the channel, and I want to just keep getting better for all of you. Thanks for supporting me, and I hope I can give back by providing quality content as well as teaching you a thing or two. Have a good day. Until next time, you've been electrified.